My name is Sanchia Alasia, and I'm the Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion here at London South Bank University. And we're delighted to welcome you to one of our International Women's Day event with Diane Abbott MP. We've been celebrating the month with a variety of events, and we're delighted to have this event, which will be led by Rasheed, who will be going through a conversation with Mia Morris and interviewing Diane. So we ask everybody to mute their microphones. You are able to put comments and reflections and questions in the chat, but we ask everybody to mute so that we can manage the sound quality. I also want to read our respect and dignity statement. So everyone attending or speaking at an LSBU event here virtually should be treated with respect, dignity and courtesy. We operate an environment built on equality, inclusion and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback and comments, and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating and bringing communities together. We do not tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour, including behaviour that potentially impacts or contradicts our reputation and values, will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any example of this behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. It will be great to see your comments, but do keep them reasonable, rational and respectful, bearing in mind that the views represented here today are for the purposes of our meeting today. We want all of our events to be an enjoyable, safe and warm experience for you all. And so thank you in advance for adhering to these guidelines. So at this time, I want to pass over to Grace, who is our Race Equality Manager at London South Bank University, to do the welcome.
Thank you, Sanchia. On behalf of London South Bank University, welcome everyone to a very special International Women's Day event. My name is Grace Agbawale-Adereti, and I am the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Programme Manager for Race Equality. The theme of International Women's Day is Embrace Equity. We are also 1 month on from Race Equality Week, which had the theme, It's Everyone's Business. We will be hearing from an array of esteemed change makers whose achievements speak for themselves as we recognise the trailblazing impact in public service of the Right Honourable Member of Parliament for Hackney and North and Stoke Newington, Diane Abbott MP. Before we hear from Diane, I'm pleased to introduce Mia Morris, OBE, and Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Mia came to prominence during the 80s, working with Alex Pascal and Juliet Alexander on Black Londoners for Radio London, where she presented a youth slot. She also worked as an event consultant for the Ethnic Minority Unity at Greater London Council on their Anti-Racism Year, Third Eye Film Festival, and the Black Experience. Mia heads up the Cane Rose Peer Support Project by day for Sound Minds in Battersea, now celebrating its 30th birthday. Mia was awarded an OBE in 2011 for her services in establishing the Black History Month website in the UK. She is a cultural community activist and ran 3 successful websites now closed, plus a very successful speakers bureau, which meant a lot of African and Caribbean academics and activists paid for their services by the heritage community. Mia is a qualified teacher and is specialised in negotiating and organising high-end, well-attended events and activities, including working with the Black Cultural Archives and co-organiser of the groundbreaking 2010 event, Black History Live at Wembley. In her spare time, she works on the Black History Maker digital magazine, which comes out twice a year. Without further ado, a big welcome to Mia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mia Morris in the house. Greetings, everyone. Let's celebrate this special day, which is dedicated to Diane. And without further ado, I'd like to hand on to Patrick Vernon, campaigner, social commentator, and cultural historian.
Thanks so much for that, Mia, and thank everyone for being here this afternoon to celebrate 36 years in politics. It's no mean, easy feat to be a politician, but one individual that has stood a step at a time has been Diane Abbott. She's my local MP in Hackney for many years. We've campaigned together on the whole range of issues as well. So it's a real honour that I've been asked to start this process of all of us giving our tributes to Diane and her amazing contributions. We are all waiting to receive her official memoirs. I can remember talking to Diane some years ago. I said, Diane, how come you're not written your book yet? If you were in America, you're probably on your 4th memoir by now. And you said, Patrick, there's too many people alive, which is good, which means that you've got something interesting to tell in your life stories. You have inspired, if not hundreds, tens of thousands of women, Black, white and brown women in the UK and around the world, about being the first woman to be elected in Parliament in 1987. There are so many iconic images of you over the last 36 years. The image of yourself, Bernie Grant, Keith Baz and Paul Boateng in 1987. Images of you with all the women Labour politicians in that same year. And I can remember this time last year on the steps of Hackney Town Hall, where you spoke out for justice for Child Q. You have been there. We've worked together on the Windsor scandal. I can remember that you organised a meeting in Parliament during the height of the scandal, where over 500 Black people turned up in committee rooms 9, 10, 11 or 12 to the horrors of the Sergeant at Arms to let people know that we wanted justice. For many, many years, you have campaigned around education for children in terms of improving the self-esteem of Black boys and Black girls. You've been a trailblazer in many ways. You've done so many things, and yet you are still here after 36 years as a parliamentarian, still respected despite all the hate mail and all the stuff that you have received. You are there and consistent. And when people say, and use that expression, Black don't crack, we all crack, we all know that. But you have always been there consistently fighting for the rights, not just for Black people, but for everyone in the centre of injustice. So it's a great honour for me to start today's proceedings and for everyone to be involved in that. Diane, we love you. Diane, we salute you. The final thing I want to say, I can remember perhaps the 2 elections ago, where a number of young Black women, they organised an event for you to show love and gratitude for your hard work, because they felt inspired by you. And continue another 36 years, and we'll be there for you all the way. Thank you, Diane. Just keep up the good work for the community as well. I think I have to go over to Rasheed, who's going to be your host, compare a massive ceremony online.
Thank you very much for that, Patrick. Delight to be here. And Mia, I think that Mia Morris has got another little surprise up her sleeve before we hear from Diane herself in conversation. Because Mia Morris, for anyone who doesn't know, Mia knows everybody, just like Diane does. So I think you've got a couple of Diane's long-term friends and colleagues in the house. I can certainly see one of them. Mia, do you want to introduce the Professor Dame who is in the house?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's with great honour and pleasure that I introduce lecturer and Professor of Nursing, Dame Elizabeth Anionwu, a Professor of Nursing at the University of West London. In 1979, Elizabeth became the UK's first sickle cell nurse counsellor. Her memoir, Dreams from My Mother, was published in 2021. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Mia. And first of all, congratulations to the organisers for setting up this event. It's so needed. Diane, we love you. We've got your back. We'll always have your back. And how you have survived, as Patrick has alluded to, is just unbelievable. And you should have never had to go through all that rubbish. We're friends here. We're sisters, we're brothers, we can say what we like. So I would like to congratulate you, Diane, and it's fantastic that the organisers have put this event in respect to International Women's Day, because what a sister, what a global sister you have been. I won't take much time. I want to just point out why I've always identified with you, Diane. First of all, your mother was a nurse, and I've always realized, even before I met you, well, no, after I met you, I have to say, you've had this really strong desire not only to support all of us involved with the health service, but you've had a particular affinity with sickle cell disease. And I'll come on to that in a minute. On a more personal note, I was delighted when I eventually found out. I knew you'd been to Cambridge University. I hadn't realized for some time that you went to Newnham College, which was the college that my own mother went to. My mother did not complete her classics degree because of being pregnant with me, and we're talking about the late 40s, a different era to yours, Diane. But we're also aware of you've had issues from the word go, but I just love the way you address it. The next time, the next link, and in fact, the first time I saw you, I was at the OAD conference in 1979. It was the Organization for Women of African and Asian Descent. And I think, and you'll correct me, Diane, if I've got this wrong, but I think you were working for the NCCL, or you were about to work for it. But what I remember is that a few days before that conference, there'd been a mega feature about you in the Evening Standard. I mean, we're talking about 1979 to have this feature. And you had an afro then, if I remember. Yes. And oh, the thrill it gave me. We all can recall, and we still hear it on our documentaries, the first time we see a Black person on the television. To me, this was the first time I'd ever seen a feature about a Black woman. And it gave me, oh, I can't tell you, Diana, it gave me such a thrill. So congratulations on that. Then to move on, we come to 1987. I don't need to say anything more. You're all good. I should have apologized right at the outset. I'm sorry. I do have to leave, and unfortunately, I won't be able to stay for the whole event. But I think it's been recorded, and I'm looking forward to watching back the whole proceedings. But 1987, come on, girl. I mean, that was something else. Oh, we were just dancing in Brent, because at that time I was running the Brent Sickle Cell and Thalassemia Center, as you know, Diane. And I want to then come on to another area where you have really led on the support for all of us in respect to sickle cell because of your own personal knowledge. I'm sure your mum's influence, your knowledge of the health service, but also as for your constituency. It's a significant issue. And where I came to know how you operate on a more political level and leadership level, Diane, was, so I'm laughing because I don't know whether you realized, I used to laugh silently at your tactics. They were brilliant. You chaired the all-party parliamentary group on sickle cell and thalassemia. And what I used to observe every time I went to the meetings down at the Houses of Parliament is you made sure that it was those individuals affected by the illness themselves who always had the first opportunity to speak. And you had a way of, it's just your way, Diane. I loved it. When the professionals wanted to have, and of course the professionals were much more experienced at getting their voice across at a meeting such as this, and weren't overwhelmed or not too overwhelmed about coming down to the Houses of Parliament. Oh, you sorted them out in the inimitable way, Diane, that you sort people out. I loved it. And you just stop them in the tracks and say, and take time and be patient and have the pauses and not be enabling individuals who are overwhelmed by coming down to this venue. What did they have to say? What were their experiences? And I just really admired the way you did that. And I would look forward to those meetings, Diane, to see who's she going to sort out next. So anyway, so I want to conclude that, as has been talked about, I look forward to your memoirs coming out, Diane. I want to read your story as you write it. I'm sure some of the people wouldn't have died, I'm afraid, but come on, I hope we're going to get as much insight in how you have survived and how you have led and how you have, anyway, everything. I want to finish by congratulating you and telling you that we've still got your back. And there are many people I know that when they've started to talk about you, immediately know by my facial gestures, shut up. I will not accept what you're saying, and I will defend you. I will defend you, Diane. I'm very, very proud of you. Well done. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Dame Elizabeth. And there's one other voice we've heard in the room who wants to toast you, Diane, before we go deep into conversation. The irrepressible, the wonderful Linda Bellos. I can hear your wonderful warm voice. International human rights campaigner and former council leader. We're delighted that you're here and a long-term friend of Diane. Do you want to share a few wonderful words before we hear from the great lady herself?
Oh, wow. I can't see you, unfortunately, but I can hear you talking to me. Gosh, Diane and I go back a long way. Black sections of the Labour Party is the first, I think, we worked together. And Diane had been then the only Black woman to be selected by the Labour Party as a candidate. The men were brothers, but Diane was Diane, and I'm so impressed, Diane, that you're still active, vocal. Oh, lots of very, very positive things I continue to experience as an MP, as a Black woman, as the first Black woman. Wow. So I'm not sure I want to say much more, except thank you. Thank you for all the work you have done and are doing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Linda Bellos. Let's get the applause going. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm Rasheed Ogunlaru, coach, speaker and author. I'm delighted to be here in conversation with the one and only Diane Abbott MP. Diane, I want to welcome you to the floor. Let's give a really warm round of virtual applause. Diane Abbott, a pleasure to see you. How are you feeling right now after those wonderful warm toasts? Ah, and you're just on mute. It's the only time we'll ever have a chance to say that about you, that you're on mute. And meanwhile, everyone, just whilst Diane's unmuting, I'm going to be in conversation with her for a while.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you loud and clear. How are you doing, Diane?
I'm fine. And it's really positive to hear what people have to say, because when you've been in the public space as a Black person for this long, sometimes you can feel a little bit low, and sometimes you don't remember, first of all, how many people your paths has crossed, and that out there are people that feel positively. And it was great to hear from Linda. Linda and I haven't met up for decades, but we met each other partly through the Black sections, but partly actually I worked for Linda briefly as one of her press officers, and she was a great woman, and it's great to hear from her today.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we're just so glad that we're here today to celebrate you, to celebrate International Women's Month. So if people haven't had their fill of incredible events, then this is one to top them all with you here today. And Diane, I want to start off by taking you not back to the very, very beginning, but an auspicious date that a number of people have mentioned, 1987. And 1987, June 1987, for those of us who kind of remember it, I'm trying to pretend that I don't remember it, but I remember it very, very well, was that auspicious day, as Patrick has pointed out, that 4 people became MPs and broke the mold and made history. Bernie Grant, Paul Boateng, Keith As, and your good self. What can you remember about that day?
Well, the first thing to say is that although we were all running for safe seats, it was by no means certain we'd actually win. because the Labour Party had run Black people in safe seats before and they'd lost because white people wouldn't vote for them. There was, going way back when, there was David Pitt, who ran, I think, in the 70s. Then there was Russell Prophet, run in the early 80s, and they both lost. So there was no guarantee that we'd actually win. So that element of uncertainty right up until when they... Hello?
Sorry about that. We just needed to mute a couple of people. Everyone, just remember to pop yourself on mute. We can hear you loud and clear. Yeah, Diane.
Yeah, well, first of all, there was that element of uncertainty. I mean, I didn't believe I'd won until I saw all the ballot papers piling up higher than everybody else's. And it was a great moment. My mother was there, my brother was there, old friends I hadn't seen for decades turned up. And they said to me subsequently, we knew you were going to be Britain's first Black woman MP, and we had to be there. So it was the moment I hadn't believed would happen until, you know, the final hours watching the ballots being counted. But it was also a very exciting moment, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, 10 years later was another incredible moment, which is when Labour Party swept to power. But before we get to that, I want to go way, way back, and I want to find out a little bit about your background. And over the coming months, lots of people are going to be finding out a lot about your background, because, Diane, I'm delighted that a book of on your life story, an authorized biography, is just being released. So people are going to be looking up this and reading this. I posted it earlier on saying, and someone said, I need to read all about it. But I know that you're also going to be writing your own memoirs. Can I just ask, where are you in that process of writing your memoirs? And what was the process of helping support with this book, like Diane? Was it easy? Was it, what was it like?
Well, it was interesting. You know, I've been in politics for over 30 years, and you have to kind of think back and remember stuff. The difference between that book and my book is that book is an excellent book, and it places my political career in the context of the politics of the day. But the book I'm writing is more of a personal book, and at the point it's talking about how I felt. They're different books, they kind of fit together, but they're different books. And it's amazing to have to look back and think back about things I haven't thought about for decades.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? So that book by Robin Bunce and Samara Linton, I believe, is out, and people are going to be looking for that book, and they're going to be with bated breath waiting for your book. I want to go way, way back. The wonderful Mia Morris said to me, well, you might want to listen to an interview that Diane gave on Desert Island Disc a while ago. And I really warmly listened to that interview, Diane, and I heard that was it that when you were listening to the radio all those years ago, when you were a young girl listening to politics, was that the moment where you decided that you wanted to be a politician? Can you tell us a little bit about when was the moment when you knew that you wanted to be involved in politics or public life and making life better for others and public service?
Well, I was a little girl. I was still in primary school, but every morning my mother used to comb out my hair and plait it in front of the dressing table in her bedroom. She would comb it out, she would plait it, and I think she would often put ribbons in it. But while she was doing that, every morning she had what was called then the home service, but in fact it's now Radio 4. And she'd have the 8 o'clock news on, and I would listen to it with kind of rapt attention. And there'd be stuff about the United Nations, stuff about British politics. And I would think, and remember, this is a little sort of, 10-year-old girl, I would think, oh, if I was Prime Minister, I'd do that. If I was Director General of the United Nations, I would do the other. Now, nobody told me that, Black women didn't do those things. I just thought, I would have those roles. I'd be part of politics, and I would do things that would help other people. So I've been interested in politics and saw myself as an actor on the political stage from a very young age.
Wonderful, wonderful. Could you tell us just a little bit about the family environment growing up, and what was the because we know that a number of remarkable things happened, even before you became an MP, going to Cambridge. When I was growing up, for example, going to university, let alone aspiring to going to something like Cambridge, seemed to be out of our reach. Can you tell us a little bit what growing up was like, what your parents were like, and what role they played in encouraging you to be ambitious and to go for your dreams?
Well, my mother and father came from Clarendon in Jamaica, and Clarendon is a rural parish in the centre of Jamaica. And yeah, where they were born was a little village called Smithville, and essentially it was a rural village, and people grew what they ate. But over time, the males of the village would go overseas to earn money to send back. So when they were building the Panama Canal, a lot of Jamaicans went over there to help with that. And then after the Second World War, they started to go both to England and to Florida. I had uncles that went to Florida to pick fruit and so on. My parents both left school at 14. And they came here separately, but they had known each other in Smithville, so they got together and they got married. And although they had left school at 14, they were very clear that education was important for their children. It was important for their children to move forward. Now, I don't think it ever occurred to them that I could go to Cambridge because, that was a little bit outside of their, understanding, but they were very supportive. I remember my mother took me to the public library. I don't know how old I was, 9, 10, and signed me up because she herself didn't read books really, but she knew it was important for me to read books. So they were very ambitious for their children and very supportive.
That's really incredible. They're wonderful, wonderful to hear. Audience, I bet you've got loads and loads of questions. There is going to be an opportunity. We are going to take some questions a little bit later on. So be thinking about the questions that you're wanting to ask to Diane. But tell us then, let's fast forward a little bit then. So you had that wonderful, rich, supporting, nurturing Jamaican family, supportive. Tell us a little bit about then Cambridge, because, what was that like, and how did that shape the Diane Abbott that we would come to know in public life?
Well, the point about Cambridge was that nobody in my family had been to university, nobody at all, let alone Cambridge. And I decided I wanted to go because my school went on a coach trip. And Cambridge is lots of spires and Gothic architecture, so I was completely swept away. So I went back, and in those days, in order to go to Oxford, Cambridge, you had to sit a special exam. You couldn't just submit your A-levels, you had to sit a special exam. And also, if you were doing a non-scientific subject, you had to do a Latin exam, which in effect excluded most state school children from it. But in my grammar school, I had done Latin at O-level. Anyway, I came back from my coach trip to Cambridge and I said to my history teacher, very sort of bold, I said, oh, I want to do the Oxford and Cambridge entrance. And she looked at me and it's almost like her lip curled. And she said, I don't think you're up to it. I said, quick as a flash, but I do. And that's what matters, isn't it? Now, what made, a teenage girl say that? But I did. Anyway, I went to Cambridge because I thought it was a beautiful city. But then when I got there, I realised that there weren't many people like me. There weren't any people like me. I remember going to see my history tutor, sort of the first few days we went to see her. And she was in like an armchair, and all of us as history students at the college were sitting on the floor, cross-legged. And I looked around me, and these were all white girls, and they were all obviously middle-class white girls. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what have you done now? I didn't know, I hadn't known really what to expect. I just thought, I want to do this and I'm going to do it. And so it took a lot of adjusting because it was so different to what I was used to. I remember being in, because we had a dining room, and I remember being in the dining room and hearing one of the girls talk about her parents' country cottage. And I thought, a country cottage? Do you know, all of it was very alien. But I adjusted, and I suppose it was helpful to have gone to an all-white institution, even an all-white upper middle class institution, because it prepared me for going to white institutions after that.
And I think, and going into institutions you did, because I understand you went into the civil service.
Yeah.
So the civil service, tell us a little bit about that. And by now, were you beginning to, was a thirst for politics beginning to happen, or some kind of community involvement? Tell us a little bit about the service, and then tell us about when the first time when you're thinking, I want to get involved in this stuff, because we know as a little girl, you thought, well, if I was Prime Minister, if I was in the United Nations, this, I'll do that. So tell us a little bit about the civil service and when you decided about a life in public life.
Well, I went straight into the Home Office from university. I was what they call a graduate trainee. And I was in the kind of Home Office department, prisons and the parole board and so on. And what the Home Office sort of emphasised to me was...
Diane's frozen just for a little while, but she'll be back with us. So audience, Diane's already shared so much about her growing up, the early years, her parents, the role that they took, the encouragement there. You're going to get an opportunity soon to be able to ask questions, so get those questions ready and get them ready to pop it into the chat box. And we also do have a few messages that we have had received in advance. We might also dive to one of those messages shortly. So hopefully we'll get Diane back here very, very, very shortly. But in the meantime, I think we've got a couple of lovely messages that we've got. So I'm wondering, the wonderful Libby from the team. Libby, I think we've got a couple of messages that we've had of other people wanting to share wonderful, rich words of support to Diane. And I think we've got a couple of messages, including from the Bishop of Dover. So maybe we could cue that up and hear some wonderful words of what people have got to say about Diane, and we'll get her back soon and we'll continue the conversation with. So we'll cue those messages, but also get your questions ready.
And what I'd like to do is have Zita Holborn do her poetry after these questions.
Fantastic. Okay, so Zita, get ready. So Zita's got a wonderful poem ready for us, so we can either go to the video, if we're able to get to one of the video. Diane,
sorry, I'm back. Yeah. Stop and search. I was also quite interested then, actually began to be interested in education, and how education was failing, in particular Black boys, I felt. And also around that time, I joined the Labour Party, but I did it almost as a form of rebellion from being in the Home Office. If you were a career civil servant, you had to ask permission to join the Labour Party. So it was all part of a little bit of rebellion. So yeah, it was about that time that I began to feel very strongly about the unfairness in society.
So that happened, but I understand before politics began to be the career that you went into, you spent a bit of time in the media. Is that right? Because it would make sense, Diane, because for those of us who've seen on shows like where you're chatting with people like Michael Portillo and so on, you always seem very comfortable in media studio. Can you tell us a little bit about your life in media, which some of us won't know about?
Well, I was at the Home Office. Then I went to an organisation which is now called Liberty. It was a civil liberties campaigning organisation. But then I went from there, first of all, to work for a London ITV station. It was called Thames at the time, but it was the London ITV station. Then I went on to TBAM, which is the breakfast television station. I liked television. I liked the fact that it was very fast. I liked the fact that every day was different. I liked the fact that you got to know people. I thought it was sort of fun. And you're right, because I worked in television for 2 or 3 years, mostly behind the camera, but sometimes in front of the camera, mostly behind the camera though. But I got to know it. I got to feel very comfortable with cameras and, television technology. And it did help me when I became an MP because I was always completely relaxed.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, maybe I think that might be a good moment to pause. You said the word relax, and we've got don't know if you know about this, Diane. We thought this would be no ordinary, just a conversation with, we've got these plaudits and so on. We have a young poet in the room called Zita. Is Zita there? Zita, you've got a couple of poems for us, and one which is very apt for Diane. So I want to hand over to you to just share a little bit of inspiring words. Zita, I can see you there, so over to you.
Thank you. Well, I have to thank you, Rasheed, for calling me young. I haven't been called young for a few decades, so thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a couple of poems. Diane's received one of these poems when I wrote it at the time, because it was a tribute to her about 10 years ago. And I'm going to dedicate the second poem to her. And Diane, I just want to place on record my thanks to you for everything you've done for us, for our communities, for me, the inspiration that you've given us, the strength, and we've got your back. We've always got your back. Just remember that we're there with you as well as you've been there for us. So the first poem I wrote in response to something unpleasant that was directed at Diane, which made me furious. And as a poet, I often put that anger into a poem. And I'm reading from my book, Striving for Equality, Freedom and Justice, if you can see that. And this is published by Hansiv, one of our oldest Caribbean publishers in the UK. So it's called No Apology. Chained and enslaved, stalled and contained, no apology. Lynchings and Jim Crow laws, glass ceilings and closed doors, no apology. Colonial rule and centuries of oppressive attack upon attack in succession, no apology. Apartheid and segregation, inequality and discrimination, no apology. Poor housing, low pay, racist abuse day after day, no apology. Ignorance and prejudice, bigotry and injustice, no remorse. Treated as inferior and viewed as worse, no apology. National Front and the BNP, far-right politicians on TV, no apology. Top Gear and David Starkey, offensive names like Wog, Packy and Darky, no apology. Stop and search racial profiling, workplace harassment and bullying, no apology. Attacking multiculturalism, institutional racism, no apology. But when a Black politician posts a tweet online, she's wrongly accused of committing a racist crime, whilst all we've experienced is expected to be forgiven. This is the response I believe she should have given: no apology.
Wonderful, wonderful. Wonderful, Zita. Thank you. And you've got another short poem. Right?
Another short poem, and it's a poem called Progression, and it's about Black women. And I am dedicating that poem today to Diane. Progression. They're blocking me from progression, trying to cause my regression. They can't abide that I preside, adept and articulate, thinking, how ridiculous. She's a woman, sole parent and Black. We can't let her progress, not someone like that. I don't fit into their Oxbridge ideal. I come from the streets, I'm real. I grew up in South London, Peckham, raised by my Caribbean mum. I rate myself second to none, not afraid to speak my mind about discrimination I find. I know my rights and represent all those people that they resent. They call me an ethnic minority, but not with my consent. I define myself as a majority, and that term they use, I resent. Only have to look at the world to see we make up the majority. That term is just mental slavery designed to undermine the likes of you and me. So they're blocking me from progression. Call it a permanent recession. Don't want to see someone of my gender or race honor their executive boards with my grace. But when I tell them how I feel, give it to them straight. Remember, I'm real. They tell me they find me aggressive, confrontational, and excessive. But you know, if I was educated at Oxford, Cambridge, or even Yale, they tell me they find me assertive, sensational, and progressive. But I'm an ethnic majority. My ancestors fought slavery, and like a suffragette, it's not over yet, because I'll rise above them one day soon, despite their secret chants of the N-word and coon. You see, I'm fired with a flame that will burn out all their shame. I may not rise to fame, but I can play them at their own game. And though they won't give me a level playing field to disseminate all I yield, just remember I've combated racism, sexism, fascism, and oppression simultaneously, not in succession. And I'm still standing, still achieving, and there's no way I'm leaving. They may block my progression in the workplace. See this face? They may spit at it, shut doors in it, look down at it, disregard it. But still I shine in the face of adversity, and I didn't need to go to university to figure out what they're about. I may be a woman and I may be Black, but know something, I'm proud of that. Life isn't a concession. And I've got a confession. I overcame multiple oppression. So as sure as hell don't need permission to achieve promotion or progression. And that's the end of this lesson. Thank you. And thank you, Diane.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. No apology and progression. How appropriate for today, how appropriate for International Women's Day a few days on, and how appropriate for you, Diane. Diane, that's a lovely link to just talk about womanhood, Black women, strong Black women. You know, those of us who really know anything know that, you know, Black women really run things, isn't it? We know that. So Diane, I just want to ask, I mean, this morning, I just happened to be sending a message to a contact of mine. She works in leadership. And she said, oh, Diane, and she started to just rave and just think, and like so many, like thousands of Black women, they look to you, they look to people like you, look to women like Dawn Butler, and they see you as an inspiration. How does it feel to have that people to look at you in that way? And were you aware back in '87 when you gained that seat, that was what would happen? People would be looking to you, being inspired by you, and thinking, I can follow in her footsteps?
No, I wasn't really aware of that when I first became a member of Parliament. I want to do my best, and I've tried to do my best since then, but I didn't really think about people looking to me as a role model. But then I gradually began to understand that. And that's a responsibility, because there are things that you might do that you think you really can't do because people are looking to you, particularly young people. So it's obviously positive, but it's also a little bit of a responsibility.
I know one of the things that you take very dear to heart is that role of being an MP and the local community. You talk a lot about community and the importance of it. Can you tell us, what is it that excited and continues to motivate you as being an MP for 36 years? Can you tell us, I mean, what's that like, and what keeps you going? What keeps you passionate about being MP in Hackney? Let's big up Hackney for those of you who are in and around Hackney. So tell us a bit about that, Diane.
Well, Hackney's great, and I've always thought it was great. You know, when I was first elected, obviously I moved into Hackney, and I would meet people, you know, outside of Hackney. He'd say, they realised I was an MP, then they'd say to me in horror, "You live in Hackney?" Because the idea was, even though you were the MP, it wasn't a place where anybody respectable would want to live. But I loved Hackney then, and I love it now. But it's also somewhere that's always changing, which makes it really interesting. So it's a great place to live in and to represent. People are very supportive, actually. When bad things have been said about in the media, Hackney people will stop me on the street and say, we've got your back. So it's great, it's energetic, it's supportive, and you can't get bored representing Hackney because there's always something going on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, with that talking about community, we were talking a while ago about how lots of women are inspired by you. It's not just women, many men too. And we've got somebody in the audience whose life has been, they say, partly transformed by your inputs. That person is Sheldon Thomas. Sheldon, I wonder if you might want to just say a few words a bit about yourself, your story, and how Diane has played a part in the work that you do today. Over to you, Sheldon.
Hopefully everybody can hear me. Basically, during the 80s, we had a lot of problems in this country as young Black men growing up in the 70s. And one of the problems was racist police officers. And in order to protect ourselves from racist police officers, we had to form what you call gangs today, because we couldn't walk streets on our own because we was either chased by the National Front or attacked by racist police officers. And obviously, one thing led to another when you form gangs, because you then begin to get involved in other things. So what started out as a social response, us fighting against the police, then became a criminal response, because we then started to self-destruct. In other words, we started to get involved in selling drugs and carrying weapons and that kind of stuff. So when I say self-destruct, during that time period, some of my friends were shot dead due to rival gangs. And I had heard about Bernie Grant and Diane Abbott. And at that time, for many Black kids, we didn't believe in the system. We didn't believe that this country was for us as Black people. So when we heard about Bernie Grant, Diane Abbott, Lord Pitt, Keith Vaz, I began to think, well, maybe there might be a possible way of see if I can meet these people. So somehow Bernie Grant, I managed to get hold of Bernie Grant, who then said to me, him and Diane Abbott are organizing a trip to America to look to engage with the Black caucus. And they wanted me, as a person who was from the streets, to be a part of that, which was a shock, because to many of my friends at that time, it was unheard of for somebody from the streets to get involved in politics. It's completely unheard of. But what I'd say is that for me, what I realized about Diane Abbott and Bernie Grant, even though I was from Brixton, they looked at me in a different way. I can't even put it into words. They looked at me and made me, the way they spoke, for instance, like just going at the airport and seeing Diane Abbott and Lord Pitt was like, even my mum was shocked, because it was like, these are MPs, these are people that you never thought would mix with us. And that's when I began to realize that the things that I was doing on the streets, we necessarily didn't have to do. There was another way. And Bernie Grant and Diane Abbott were showing us a way of fighting injustice from within the system, which to us was unheard of, like completely unheard of. We just didn't think that would ever happen. So my influence, especially for Diane Abbott, because like she was a Black woman, and her and Bernie Grant were suffering atrocious racism beyond anyone's imagination, you understand? And for me, from somebody from the road, even when I went to their meeting, I spoke slang, and yet it didn't put Diane off, it didn't put Bernie off. They looked at me as somebody that they can help to bring to another level. And that was somebody who, she wasn't an MP for Brixton, she wasn't an MP for South London, she had nothing to do with it, but she was prepared to give me some time. I know she might not remember me because I had dreadlocks back then, but the thing for me, I know you want me to hurry up, but it's very hard to put this in a very short and quick time for you to really understand the importance of somebody like Diane and Bernie Grant before he passed away. what it meant to a young black kid who was a gang member, who was from the streets, and yet was discarded by society because of the color of his skin. But they took me in, and they were willing to risk them being an MP to associate themselves with a guy that was a criminal, and take me to a country where I never thought I'd ever see Jesse Jackson. They brought me to Jesse Jackson. We had dinner with Jesse Jackson. And when I told my guys who were on the road with me, they could not believe I had dinner with Jesse Jackson, Diane Abbott, Bernie Grant, and meeting the Black Caucus, such an event. So it made me realize there was a way out of the ghetto. There was a way out of dealing with racism, and Diane Abbott and Bernie Grant was leading the way with that approach. And what I liked about Diane Abbott and Bernie Grant is they were always looking for the next generation. They never thought it's going to be me and me and me only. They were always looking for the next generation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Sheldon. I can see lots of people have got also questions that want to. If you've got questions, please do put them in the chat box. And wonderful, what wonderful testimony. Diane, when you hear that, when you hear things like that, because of course we know politics can be a tough, incredibly tough business. And often, you know, particularly the media may not hear the thanks, but when you hear, as no doubt countless you do, put aside some things on social media, all the people say, thank you, how does that feel that you've helped encourage people who are doing the incredible work like Sheldon is doing now? How does that make you feel?
Well, it's very moving to hear what Sheldon had to say. Because the fact that you can even change one person's life makes it all worthwhile, really. And he's right, that Bernie and I will always focus on the next generation. It wasn't about how important we could be in the here and now. It's what we could do to bring up the next generation. And so it's great to see that worked. It worked.
Can you tell us, before we're going to soon go to the questions here, and I've got one more person who you know who's in the room, who I want to bring up, Juliet Alexander, who long-term friend, and I know that she's on the call, and I'd love to hear her thoughts. But could you tell us a little bit, Diane, about leadership and the importance of those people, perhaps people in this room included, who are wanted in whatever way they might to get involved in leadership? I was just this morning running a session for lots of Black and Asian minority ethnic people in the civil service, helping them on their leadership journey. I was running a session for people in the NHS. So whatever, be it people going into politics and so on. Can you tell us, Diane, about the importance of us, particularly people of colour, being in politics or being in leadership? Can you tell us a little bit about that, and any words that you would say encouraging people who are perhaps at the early stage, or perhaps a career like yourself or like Linda, or what like Linda's done in the past and other people in this room?
Well, I think leadership is very important. And I think that in a country like Britain, you should have a diverse leadership. We will be a stronger country if we have a more diverse leadership. And people shouldn't assume that leadership isn't for them, because they don't see people like them in leadership, or they don't see people like them in leadership in particular professions. So I think people should definitely reach towards leadership, but always remember, it's not just about you, it's about the people that you're trying to support and help.
Wonderful. And we're going to, because we've got a number of contributions we're going to get in and questions from the floor. There's a handful of people who've actually sent messages here that we'll get to you, Diane. There's some people who've sent some other friends of yours. It's a bit like This Is Your Life, isn't it? With, you know, without Eamon Andrews. I'm almost aged myself there. But there's one person I'm very, very keen to bring in before we open the floor to the audience. Your dear friend, I understand, Juliet Alexander, broadcaster. Juliet Alexander, are you in the room? I've seen you there. Juliet, over to you. Here you are. Yeah, let's get you to unmute, Juliet, and everyone else do pop yourself on mute, and then we'll get to questions. So Juliet, let's get you to unmute, and it'll be lovely to hear a few words. Yes, you just need to click on unmute, and then
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Just project a little bit, Juliet. Delight that you're here with us. We can hear you. Do you want to just share a few words? Because you've known how you're a broadcaster. What do we all need to know about that we don't know already about the wonderful Diane Abbott?
I've promised Diane I won't say too much and let any of her secrets out. Diane's an amazing lady. I've known her for many years, when she, long before politics, when she was a journalist herself. So she certainly knows how, and one of the things I think that brought us together was obviously in those early days around the New Cross massacre and the way the media vilified Black people, it was important for us to make sure that they had a diversity of voices in the media. I mean, I continued in the media as Diane went into politics, but I now work in a school where we champion diversity, underrepresented people in film and television, because I think it's important that those voices also get to report on the important stories, the diverse stories. Now, Diane is, as I said, we met millions of years ago. She's a great friend to my children and I to her son. And she's a great walker. She's also a huge supporter of well-being. So she walks with us either on a Wednesday or on a weekend. And what is lovely about our walks is wherever we go, you know, Black, white, or indifferent, children, you know, everybody stops and says, "Hello, Diane, you're my favorite politician." She has a real human touch. People recognize her and adore her. And it angers me, some of the vilification she gets on social media, because she herself is a warm and lovely person. And just on a personal level, seeing her walking through the parks, we do these hikes and walks, and you ask her to do the Rocky up steps. You should see that woman run up steps, you know, singing the Rocky theme song. No, she's great, and she supports the next generation. I work with Operation Black Vote. I also work with the Amos Bursary. She's a huge supporter of the next generation, making sure that they, you know, achieve their dreams. Not just achieve it, but understand what is out there, and then go for the top. You know, don't just settle, but actually reach for the top. So I think she's a brilliant woman, great role model, lovely friend, and great politician.
Wonderful, well said, wonderful, well said. We've got some questions coming. I can see that somebody's waving, desperate to ask a question, but we've got some before you. So I can see you there, Titi. We'll turn to you, and you're in the car. We'll come to you in due course. We've got a couple more questions in the chat box. So Diane, you can't see this, but the people from all over London. We've got somebody here from the US, or their questions are coming in. So with your permission, we'll take a few of them over the next almost 20 minutes. So the first question I can hear is here from Yvonne. Do you think, Yvonne Rose Macmillan, welcome to you, Yvonne. Do you think that Black people in the UK are held back by their own mindset limitation, or does the unconscious bias in society play a larger part? Big question. And she said that she's from Barclays Corporate Banking there. So I'm sure it's her personal view rather than the view of of Barclays. But over to you, Diane, any thoughts on this?
I'm always slightly cautious about saying that we're held back because of our own issues. I think trying to make your way in a white society can make you internalize negative thoughts about yourself or about other Black people. But I think what holds us back really is institutional racism. And, you know, you don't, if you're in the private sector, you don't want to or need to go into the office every day and have a fight about institutional racism. But you do need to know it's out there, and you do need to have your strategies in order to overcome it and move forward. Because otherwise, it is institutional racism that's holding you back. Mm-hmm. So no, I wouldn't blame Black people for the effects of racism. Racism is out there, and we all have to have our own methods and schemes to overcome it.
Interesting. And linked to that, the next question I see in the chat box, Diane, is another question, I guess along similar lines, but EF asks, what are your thoughts on training in relation to racism? clearly we're in a time where we're needing to move toward a far more inclusive society and more culturally aware kind of society. So this person's asking, what are your thoughts on training in racism in the light of the rulings and articles coming out in regards to racism in healthcare and elsewhere? Do you think there's a value here? What's your thoughts, Diane?
I think there is a value in training. I'd be wary of white people that do training in an essentially superficial way. So the next time they're accused of racism, they can say, oh yes, but I had training. But I think in the right context, training can have a purpose.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And we've got a question here. Let's just see if this is a question. So we've got a number of things here, and I'll let you pick up whatever points here that in due course that catch your eye from this, Diane. So we've got here Dawn here, sister. Diane is for me the most iconic woman, the first Black woman to enter Parliament. How have you managed the dreadful media press? How have you managed that? This person goes on to say, took several meetings in the House of Commons and had an event. So this sounds like somebody who's known you. You inspire us all. Great person, they're saying. But Diane, I guess there's a couple of points here. We know that we're in an age, things have changed, isn't it? From back there in 87, the world has changed, the technology's changed, and social media's changed hugely. And we've got real challenges in what people can say online and hide behind, hide in the back. What are your thoughts on this? How have you personally coped? And do you have any thoughts on, for anyone in public life, let alone women and Black women in public life, on this issue of the abuse and the just the awfulness that we see and we hear?
Well, the first thing to say is when I became an MP in 87, if you wanted to send me a racist letter, you had to write it down, you had to put it in an envelope, you had to put a stamp on the envelope, put it in the letterbox. And you always had a slight feeling, even if you didn't sign it with your own name, that somehow it could be traced back to you. Whereas now, with the rise of online, which was sort of around 2000, you just press a button and you can send racist abuse to dozens, hundreds of people without getting off your sofa. And so the amount of racist abuse that, Black women in public life get is just extraordinary. In the run-up to the 2017 election, of all the abuse sent to women MPs, all women MPs, Conservative, Labour and so on, I got half of it. So it's a completely disproportionate amount. How do you deal with it? Well, to be frank, a lot of it I don't read. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. I am on Twitter. But how I manage Twitter is I block a lot of people. You say anything the slightest bit rude to me and I blocked you. And I tweet. I tweeted this morning. I tweet most days, actually, because Twitter is a good way of reaching people. But I don't read the responses. I check if people have looked at my tweet, because that's interesting. Sometimes you tweet something and you get literally 1,000 people liking it. Sometimes you only get 40 or 50. But I don't read the responses. I suppose there were two ways of dealing with abuse online. One is to try not to read a lot of it, or what I sometimes do is get my assistant to read it instead of me, which is quite dramatic of her. But she said 2 years ago, before she came to work for me, she didn't know that she would see the word nigger so often every day. But I don't read a lot of responses. And you always have to remind yourself that these people that tweet abuse, they're not a representative profile of the community. They're not. Because the thing about online is you start to think that's the real world, and you have to remind yourself it's not the real world. That's what
Really powerful points there, Diane. Let's see if we can get from you a few more questions. Teacher, I can see you there in your car. I'm coming to your questions just after this. Your question's the one after this one. So we've got Ellie in the chat box, and apologies everyone if we don't get to every question today, but we'll get through as many of them as we can. Ellie Faulkner's got a question. I work in inner city Leeds with lots of young people from different backgrounds. It can be disenfranchising for young people to be Northern as well as coping with their own cultural identities within the UK. Rarely represented in politics, how can we work to empower our young people, especially young women, to follow in your footsteps and get involved? So this is interesting. It also brings in that regional factor. Perhaps there's more representation in places like London, but as we know, we've got big Black communities all over and multiracial communities across the UK. Any thoughts here about how we can empower our young people, particularly our young women outside of London in places like Leeds?
Well, it is a good point. And what I've noticed in, over 30 years in Parliament is that whatever the problems with the London Labour Party, we've always brought forward more Black people as councillors and MPs than the rest of the country. I mean, in 87, there were 4 of us, there were 3 of us as London MPs and Keith Babs was in Leicester. But, she's quite right, the lady. I mean, if you come from the regions to the north or whatever, it's another issue apart from being working class and Black. I think all you can do is try and encourage young people's confidence, to try and expose them to things, even online, which you can do nowadays much more easily, which will sort of broaden their horizons and give them confidence. But there's no doubt that for a long time, it's been harder for young people, particularly young Black women, to come through outside of London, basically.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for that. We've got another question. TT's in the car. TT, let me just check that I've got this question right because you've typed into the chat box. The question there is, how do I navigate writing my own business and working for JPM? I'm trying to work for JPM, works for and City, but how do I navigate running my own business? I'm a life and business coach, so I'm tempted to almost dive in here. How do I navigate running my own business and working for JPM? Well, but Diane, you can have views on this, and particularly for many people, we're juggling this and juggling that. So any thoughts generally about how one juggles? Because sometimes we're in this thing, we're trying to get this career off happening, we're trying to get our business happening, or we're trying to make this happen. How do you manage it, Diane? And any tips for TT here who's trying to balance working and trying to get her own business, her own thing off the ground?
It's very difficult to juggle. I mean, I've never sought to juggle 2 businesses, but for a long time I've had to juggle being an MP and being a mother, and I was a single mother. So I think you do have to be very organised about your time. You do have to be very definite that if this is the afternoon or the evening you're spending on, occupation 1, then you're giving it your full attention. It is hard. I have to say that, but you just have to be, as I say, allocate your time very carefully and to stick to the kind of grid that you give yourself.
Good advice. Yeah, absolutely. Good advice there. Just to let you know, Dan, before we take a few last questions and a couple of last contributions, and we hope we'll get these to you. We've had some lovely messages from, and you'll know all of these people. Bishop Rose Hudson Wilkin, Bishop of Dover, has sent you a message. Fellow MP, and I hope I get this right, Bel Ribera Adi MP has sent a message, a warm message, which I was watching earlier on. There's a number of those for you to enjoy later. And your dear friend Mia, I'm sure, will make sure you get all of those messages.
Hello.
Yeah, TT.
Sorry, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Diane Abbott, because when I was 14 years old, when I was in 2014, I was awarded the London School and the Black Child Award, and I've gone on to work for JP Morgan, the UN, Citibank, Deloitte, and I now run my own business because I make more than that. So just to say a huge thank you to you for that. I don't know if you remember me. It was an event in Parliament with Patricia Scotland, etc. And huge impact on my life and my journey. And now I'm self-employed. I employ my mother, who's driving. And we have a self-care brand called Yeah Me. I'll put it in the chat. But just to say a huge thank you. You're inspiring us all, and all of the inflammatory conversations and naysayers can just piss off. That's my That's my
Titi, thanks for that. Anyone watching this before the watershed, forgive us, but Titi, wonderful words, warm words, lovely to hear, and lovely to hear. And Diane, there's something, that powerful point that you made, that often what we see necessarily, and so isn't necessarily reflected. And we've heard that today, often, isn't it? That about what's the real impact that we've had on people's lives. There are a couple of more bits of business here to be had. I know that we
Rash, I've got a message from Lord Herman Ouseley.
Lord Ouseley. So I'll let you read that. Mia Morris, let's read the message from Lord Ouseley himself.
Diane has been a stalwart of the struggle for race equality and justice, with magnificent staying power, stamina, resilience, consistency, and reliability.
Wonderful, wonderful, just wonderful words here. Lovely kind of stuff here. Maybe we'll take one last question before this. So, Diane, maybe just one last question from me. Tell us a little bit about, you touched on this thing around the future generations and so on. I mean, we could go on for hours, because I'd love to ask you about, I haven't got to ask you about 1997, Labour be in power, what your thoughts, but let's talk a little bit about the future. What are your hopes for the future? We find ourselves in, they're tough times, isn't it? I wonder, maybe the first half of the question I want to ask, do you see any parallels between how tough it is in society now than when, for example, in the 80s, when you were first thinking about politics and then got into politics? And what are your hopes looking forward for us as a society?
Well, I think in some ways things are just as bad. I mean, you may have been following stuff around the Metropolitan Police and the sexism. And I mean, there was a recent case with a Metropolitan Police officer who raped a woman, and more cases of sexual abuse are surfacing. Then there's the racism. So in some ways it's just as bad, but I'm quite positive. I think you've got a generation of white people growing up, some of whom are racist, but some of whom went to nursery, went to school with Black people, and they're more likely to see Black people as human beings than their parents' generation were. So I think there is a sort of part, not all of it, but there's a part of the white community, particularly in multiracial cities, which is more open to diversity than their parents were. But I also think that we are more moving on, very much moving on. I mean, as I say, when I first became an MP, I was the only Black woman MP. I was only a Black woman MP for 10 years in Parliament. Now we have about 14 Black women. We're seeing, you've got people like Mia and yourself and so on. We're seeing progress all the time, and that makes me positive.
Wonderful. A question popped into my head, so I'll quickly ask it. Thing you enjoy most and least about being an MP? What's the thing you enjoy most and the thing you enjoy least about being an MP?
Well, I suppose the thing I enjoy most is people coming up to me on the street, which I quite often do, and say, oh, you helped me with my housing, you helped me with my immigration. And these are things that happened years ago, but it's still, and that makes you feel it's all worthwhile. Individuals coming up to you to say thank you. I suppose what's the worst thing? How can I tell you what the worst thing is without being personally abusive about some people? I suppose one of the things about politics is it exposes you to the best in people, what's good in people. And as I say, people actually taking the trouble to come and say thank you years after you help them. But also it exposes you to some of the bad in people, in the hypocrisy in people. And I think that's probably the worst thing about politics.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, we've got, Mia, I think we've got a singer who's going to be singing a song, who's going to be singing us as we begin to wrap up. And I think, Mia, am I right? It's like Mia's there in headquarters. Mia's there in headquarters. Mia, I just want to check there's no key messages that we've missed before we hear.
I've got a message here from Ruth Chigwada Bailey, who's a criminologist and a domestic violence advocate. And she says, Keep raising the flag for us. Most of us Black women are proud of you. We're proud of your achievements and the good work you're doing for our community. It takes a very strong person to remain in such a post for as long as you have done.
Wonderful, lovely message there. Yeah, Diane, just before I hand over to our singer, Sarah Lane, I just want to say, I was thinking about this and I thought to myself, and I had this book here, which I started to read and so on. But the thing that struck me is that from all of these years, I feel as though like you're one of those people in extended, you know, like you kind of know, and that I thought it was so warming. And I thought, well, actually, what I'm more interested in is hearing Diane's own words. I mean, I encourage people to highly read this and to keep an eye out for Diane's memoirs when they emerge. But Diane, I want to say that there's something about that impact. And I remember one of my best friends once said that to me. He pointed out that aside from all the people who will tell you the impact that they've had on you, there are all the people you've never met who've had a huge impact. So I just want to say, Diane, you know, on behalf of all of those people who've never met you, who you've had an incredibly inspiring impact on, thank you for all that you've done for us. Thank you for all the people you've done in your community. I want to say thank you for all that you've done for all of us as Black people. I want you to do thank you for all the things that you've done for women. As a son of a proud single mum, I just want to say thank you for everybody and thank you for your generous time and your warmth here. And do stay with us as we wrap up the pleasantries. And we've got our singer, where is the wonderful Sarah Lane St. James, who's going to be singing a song for you, because we know you love music. We know, I heard on that, we know you love your music. And am I right, Diane, do you play, was there something about classical piano, if I got that wrong? You're a classical pianist on the quiet.
Yes, I mean, I did do one of those reality shows where I learned to play the classical piano over a period of weeks. And it's quite interesting. I found that I had a great uncle in America who'd been a successful classical pianist. So I haven't done much bashing of the piano keys recently, but when I finally retire, I want to get back to my classical piano.
Well, that's great to hear. So for me as a coach and as a speaker and somebody who sings and records, and on that musical note, I want to I'll hand over to the wonderful Sarah Lane St. James, who is going to be singing to begin to wrap up today's proceedings. Sarah Lane, thank you for joining us. Over to you. Oh, and you've frozen momentarily, but we know we're going to unfreeze you. So let's see if we can get Sarah Lane unfrozen. Otherwise, we're going to have to add her music. Well, otherwise we'll add her music. We'll have to add her music to the stuff at the end. So let's go to the messages from the team. I think, have we got Grace from the team who's going to be doing a lovely wrap up for us? So Diane, we're just going to have a few wrap up points as we're beginning to wrap up today.
And I have an unveiling. I have a surprise something for Diane.
Oh, so we'll do that. Let's hand over. Should we hand over to Grace first, or are we handing over to Mia first? Where are we going to first? Mia, have you got your unveiling, and then I'll hand over to Grace to wrap up.
Just to say, in the immortal words of Mayor Angelou, and still I rise. So this is a montage of pictures of Diane through the ages. Just remind us what a great, magnificent person she has. And there's a personal gift, a bottle of the Mia perfume, which I've given to Mia Motley. So you're in good place. So has Juliet Alexander received this. So this will come to you at a later date. And the photo montage was done by Kelly Dooley, who attended the Black Child Conferences, is now appointed head teacher of Richmond upon Thames Secondary School, and she's been there since 2016. So she says thank you, and this is her gift, Kelly Dooley.
That is really, really wonderful. Well, let's just thank everyone who's been involved in today, the London South Bank University team. I'm going to hand over to Grace. Grace, thank you and all of the wonderful team for putting today on, and I know you're going to wrap us up with some messages.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rasheed, and thanks, Mia. On behalf of London South Bank University, we would like to thank all the contributors to these valuable discussions, with special thanks to the Right Honourable Diane Abbott MP for your lifetime of public service and such an amazing and inspiring talk. We would also like to thank Mia Morris, OBE and fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts, Rasheed Ogunlaru, Patrick Vernon, OBE, Linda Bellos, Zita Holborn, Sheldon Thomas, Juliet Alexander, Lord Eastley, Belle Riviero, Penny Dooley, Rosemary Hudson, Ruth Chigwada Bailey, and Professor Dame Elizabeth Neka Anionwu OBE. We would also like to thank all of you for attending today and engaging with these discussions with us. Thank you.
That's wonderful. And just before I let Diane go, Diane, on that musical note, because we've lost our singer, and we'll get them on. Diane, tell us, what's the song we heard from you from Desert Island Discs all those years ago? But what's the song that you would like for us all to go off and play today as we celebrate International Women's Day? Aha, and the singer has just appeared, but Diane, what's the song that you'd recommend? And then I'm going to hand over to Sarah Lane to sing us out.
Oh, I suppose it would be a Bob Marley song, the No Woman, No Cry.
Beautiful choice. And Sarah Lane, thank you for coming back. Let's see if we can hear your dulcet tones to sing us all out as we enjoy our Friday afternoon. I think we've got those tech issues.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah,
yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I've had multiple tech issues, so apologies. I'm just going to adjust the camera a bit. Yeah.
Wonderful. Diane is primed. She's listening. She's looking forward. We're all looking forward to it. So thanks. Over to you, Sarah Lane.
As well. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Oh, I wonder if you've frozen. We've lost you. We're going to have to look her up. We're going to have to look her up.
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Can you hear the music? Yeah, you can hear me? I hope
we can hear you.
I'm going for it anyway, so I hope you can hear.
No.
Oh, it's such a shame. She was singing, "At last, my love has come along, my lonely." I wish I knew that one.
My Lord.
Oh, well, we hear the spirit of that. What a beautiful voice. Sarah, we're going to have to look up your details because you've got a beautiful voice. And Diane, thanks for that.
The skies above all the night I tell you. Sing along.
Oh, there was just a delay there, Sarah Lane. We're so sorry about that, but what beautiful voice. And we heard the spirit of that. We could hear.
I can call my own. I hope you can hear me. I found a thrill to grant my to a thrill that you can still burn. And here we are in for you are mine. Hello. You are mine.
Wonderful. Oh, there was tech difficulties, but your beautiful voice came through nonetheless. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Sarah Lane. Thank you, first and foremost, Diane Abbott. Thank you. Happy International Women's Day. Diane, thank you for spending your time with us. Thanks, everyone, for being part of today.
Thank you.
And light a candle every night for the fallen. Just remember those who have gone on ahead.
Thank you, Mia.
Thank
Take
you
good
all.
care, everybody.
Bless you.